All right, I'm going to go ahead and get us started. Welcome everyone to the 8th webinar in the series on the 2024 Report Card for Wisconsin's Infrastructure, today covering the condition and impacts of Wisconsin's rail infrastructure. A couple of notes of housekeeping. Please keep yourself on mute. We'll have Q&A at the end, so please put all of your questions into the chat and we will get to them at the end of the program. If you would like, you can go to the 3 dots to the upper right-hand side of your name, of your picture, in order to change your name so that we can, use it if we need to for your Q&A. Other than that, thank you for joining us. This series is brought to you by an ongoing partnership between the League of Women Voters of Wisconsin and the American Society of Civil Engineers Wisconsin section. Infrastructure isn't a partisan issue. We all use the same bridges, ports, broadband, water systems, and much more that civil engineers work to protect for the safety, welfare, and enjoyment of all. Similarly, the League of Women Voters of Wisconsin works to provide access to important advocacy information for all Wisconsinites, including around issues like the critical infrastructure of our state. We recognize that attention to the nuts and bolts of physical infrastructure is necessary to support our democracy's future. This webinar series will educate us so that we can tell our elected officials that we support funding of well-functioning and well-maintained infrastructure. Today's speakers will share their expertise and perspectives on the ways that Wisconsin's rail infrastructure protects our Wisconsinites and connects us. At the end of today's webinar, the speakers will address any questions for you. And without any further ado, I would like to introduce our moderator, Carol Dickelman. Carol, take it away.
Welcome today. We have a very full program because we have both an ASCE author, 3 invited speakers, and we are going to meet the 2024 award-winning students from the ASCE Wisconsin section. And finally, but not least, we are going to hear from Dan Zitomer about giving a tribute to Dr. Michael Lovell, who passed away in 2024. Without further ado, Joanna Bush, take it away.
Okay, let me hit my share button here. Okay, I think we are set, right? You can see my screen?
Perfect.
Okay, here we go. Okay, well, my name is Joanna Bush, and for those of you that don't know me, I have been a traffic engineer here in Wisconsin for 25 years. Was doing basically signal design, and in 2008, I joined the Wisconsin Department of Transportation as their state traffic signal systems engineer. And it was during this time that I became very active in rail crossing topics, mostly because of preempted crossings, and it has just grown since then. So when I heard that the ASCE report card was being written and that nobody had volunteered to write a rail chapter ever, I thought it was a shame, because I think there's an important story that needs to be told. And I volunteered. When it came time to write it, I realized that I didn't know as much as I thought I knew. So my co-authors are a number of reports that WISDOT has put together over the years, looking at, making plans for the future. So credit goes to the wonderful writers of those reports for a lot of what's contained in the rail report card for 2024 for Wisconsin. Now, if you're not familiar with the report card, it is a look at the state of the infrastructure throughout the state, covering many topics. You can see here all of the topics that are covered. We have in the 2024 report card all but one, and that would be because we don't have any levies that I'm aware of here in Wisconsin. So this is a big year for us, marking the first time that we have a number of topics, including rail. No one had ever written the rail chapter before. Shown here is the grades for the various chapters. We get help from outside folks to look at us, look at our report, that have that national perspective that can help kind of grade us compared to other states. And so they helped us land on a grade of B for rail. The report card itself is organized into 8 different sections for each of these items. So as I go through my presentation today, I'm going to kind of walk you through some of the highlights of these topics. However, I do encourage you to take a moment to find, and I'll have a link at the end, the report card and read it in its entirety. The rail chapter starts on page 102. So as you can tell, it's a very long report card. For those of you that might not be familiar, I want to start with a little bit of background on rail in Wisconsin. We have approximately 3,200 miles of track throughout Wisconsin. There are 4 Class 1 railroads that operate in Wisconsin and 7 Class 2 and 3 railroads. Now, the difference between a Class 1 and a Class 2 and a Class 3 has to do with the volume and revenue of the company. So there are 6 large Class 1 railroads, so 4 of them operate here in Wisconsin. Oh, the other thing I wanted to point out real quick, is that of those 3,200 miles, 600 of them are state-owned. The remainder are privately owned. So as you can well imagine, as we go through these chapters, it was a little bit difficult to get information from the rail companies to include in this report. So the good majority of the information that you hear today and in the report is going to cover what we know through sources like FRA, but then a lot on our privately owned or our publicly owned track. In terms of passenger rail, Amtrak does operate 3 passenger service lines here in Wisconsin. As hopefully you are aware, they started a new one in May of 2024 called the Borealis that goes between Chicago and Minneapolis. We also have the Hiawatha, which started in 2022, which that connects us all the way out to Seattle from the Chicago area. There's the Empire Builder, which is shown on the map here in the green. Oh, sorry, that's the Empire Builder connects us to Seattle. My apologies. And then Chicago's Metro commuter rail actually connects up into Kenosha, which is in the southeast corner of Wisconsin. So starting on the topic of condition and capacity, as I mentioned earlier, it's a little bit difficult to know kind of the condition and capacity of those privately owned track. So a lot of what I'm going to cover is about the public owned track. WSOR, which is our publicly owned rail line, Wisconsin Southern Railroad, is actively working to upgrade their 600 or so miles of track from Class 2 to Class 1. Now, if you're not a railroader, and I had to look it up myself, the difference between the two is the speed at which the trains can move and the weight, the tonnage of which they can carry. This upgrade will allow them to increase their ability to service their customers at a higher speed and a heavier weight. They are currently not able to access the Port of Milwaukee because they need trackage rights onto CPKC. So in terms of capacity, that limits their ability to service customers in and out of the port. We also have another bottleneck in the Milwaukee area that Union Pacific is dealing with, which relates to the bridges that go over the track aren't tall enough to allow for double stacking, which limits the number of cars or how they're able to bring cars in and out of Milwaukee. The Merrimack Bridge has a limitation on its capacity and its speed, which once again is a limitation to what we can do. And then there's also issues with WSOR in Janesville and in Kenosha, areas where they share trackage rights and they can only operate when other trains are not in the area. So in terms of capacity, there's definitely room for growth and expansion. When it comes to funding, the thing that I've found most interesting since getting involved in rail in Wisconsin is you hear a lot of acronyms get tossed around. You hear about all these pots of money. And Lisa's going to go into a lot of these in more detail, but very few of them are what I would consider standard constant funding sources. So starting with the state-funded programs, a little history. Back in 1977, the railroads were going bankrupt. They were having a lot of lines abandoned. And so they originally created some programs that local agencies could use to keep the railroads from going bankrupt. In 1992, Wisconsin voters approved an amendment that allowed to the state constitution that allowed that funding to be available for the state to get involved in these funding sources, which have created what we refer to as our FRIP and FRAP program, acronyms that aren't easy to pronounce. The FRIP program is a loan, essentially. We borrow money so that they can make infrastructure improvements, as the name suggests. And to date, there's been about $155 million in loans since 1992. And it's currently funded based on loan repayment. So the money we give out now is based on money we've received back from earlier loans. The FRAP program, that's a grant program. It is, as the name suggests, for the preservation of existing rail. And it has, since 1980, $326 million in grants have been given out through the FRAP program. They've recently made some changes to it, which I suspect Lisa may be talking about. It requires a match it's 80%. They want those people that are getting the grant to have a little stake in the game. So there's a matching part for them. And there's some limitations to, how and what it can be used on. The crossing surface repair program is, as it sounds, it is a program for state trunk highways only to improve the crossing surfaces themselves so that drivers on state trunk highways have an improved riding condition. You don't have the lumpy go over the tracks. They try to prioritize the worst case or the worst crossings in the state with the funding from that program. FHWA allocates Section 130 program funds to every state based on the mileage of trackage that you have. So as you can well imagine, a state like Texas gets a pretty decent chunk of the 130 program from FHWA, but Wisconsin has their money and it goes into two separate pots. One is run by the state, the other by OCR, and both are really looking at crossing safety. And then there's FRA's programs. There's a number of grants that are available. They're looking at consolidation. They're looking at removal of crossings. But once again, these are applied for funding and not constant streamed funding that comes into the state. At the end of the day, what we're all concerned with is safety. Now, you can talk about safety in a number of ways. There's safety along the track. Trespassing is an issue. What I'm going to talk about here quickly is safety at the crossings where the roads meet the railroad. Wisconsin has nearly 7,000 crossings, 70% of which are public, which means it's a publicly owned roadway that crosses the railroad at that point. In the last 5 years, meaning 2019 to 2023, because they haven't finalized the statistics for 2024, there were 208 collisions involving trains. 19 of those were fatal, 51 involved injuries, which is about a quarter of them, and 13 involved pedestrians. You can see the statistics through the graph. In terms of our total collisions, we've been kind of floating around the same number. 2023 was our best year yet in terms of total collisions, but the ideal goal is to get that to zero. In the corner here is a picture from when I was in the field. As I mentioned, a lot of my work is at interconnected intersections. These are traffic signals that are interconnected with an adjacent crossing. And I'm amazed at the number of times I see drivers stopped on tracks. I try to take a picture because a picture speaks 1,000 words, and it helps me when I'm doing presentations to remind drivers, you know, because obviously the white pavement marking through the area, the number of signs that we have, drivers still have a tendency to put themselves in harm's way. And many of our funding, the funding that I spoke about earlier when it comes to the Section 130 funding, is really looking at safety of crossings. But there's only so much we can do when a driver, you know, still makes a decision that goes against what's in their best interest. The pedestrian statistics look a little bit scary, but you'll see that the scale is on the right. I mean, 4 is still 4 too many in 2023, but we did have a good year the year before. But pedestrian safety is a totally different issue. You know, a lot of that has to do with trespassing. It isn't necessarily at crossings. A lot of times people cross where it's convenient, not where we want them to. And so there's a lot of time and effort, both on our part at the DOT, as well as FRA, looking at trespassing as a whole and the problem that that creates in terms of safety. Innovation. This is one of those topics where I was like, oh gosh, what am I going to write about? Because it is, innovation isn't something that we talk about much in the railroad world, at least on the railroad side of things. The technology they've been using for crossings hasn't changed a ton. For those of you that might be traffic engineers, you know that we speak in a common language called NEMA, so that all the signals kind of operate using the same language. This isn't true for trains. So the intercommunication between trains, you know, is something that they are actively working on, is establishing a common language, because once that is built, a lot more is possible. So in the meantime, while we're looking for the railroad industry to innovate, what we're seeing, one of the things that we're seeing is that traffic engineers are getting creative. If you're familiar with the concept of blocked crossings, this has become a hot topic in our world. And what it is when a train is either, you know, a long train is coming through a crossing and people aren't able to utilize the crossing for extended periods of time, or sometimes a train is stopped in the crossing because there's a yard nearby and they're doing switching movements. But either way, the concern is when that crossing is blocked, somebody's connection, either to medical, you know, for the fire truck to be able to get to them, for them to be able to get to where they need to go, is really limited. And they don't know how long that train is going to be sitting there. So these are just some of the people on the traffic side of things that are trying to establish a solution to this challenge. And they're innovating by installing detection systems that operate outside of the railroad, because the railroad can't tell us where they are for homeland security reasons. They have AI that's out there learning what the trains are doing, establishing patterns, looking at where they're coming from, where they're going, and predicting when they might arrive at crossings, and then using that information to alert, you know, either fire and EMS through systems that are interconnected with local agencies. Or it could be information that's available street side with signs, so that if you are at a place where you can select a different route, it might tell you like the upcoming crossing is blocked, use such and such street. So we are getting to that point where people don't like to wait. Well, let's be honest, they never wanted to wait for anything, but people's patience for waiting has gotten even worse. But if it's your grandmother or your mother or your sister that's in an emergency vehicle getting transported to the hospital, for them to be able to have that information to pick a route, to select a route that'll get them to the hospital quickest, is in everybody's interest. And so it's exciting to see the innovation that's happening around the railroad community. In terms of recommendations for raising our grade from a B to an A, I think one of the things that has stood out to me in the many years that I've been involved is the lack of dedicated funding to crossing safety. Yes, there is some. I'm not in denial that there is some, but we are often stuck in a room, and you know, Lisa can probably attest to this, where you have to prioritize. There's a lot of things we would love to do that we know we need to do, I'm helping them actively develop a list of issues at signalized intersections that are interconnected, and we have to wait till we find the funding to be able to make the fix that we know we need to make. Now, I believe that part of the problem is railroad is often seen as a private entity. Oh, the railroads will pay for that. They have the money, they're making money. But it is our traveling public and their safety that is at risk. And so hopeful for new opportunities to fund projects that address safety. But then from the standpoint of Wisconsin's businesses, addressing those bottlenecks, and most definitely an expansion of our passenger service. While we have some, there's definitely parts of Wisconsin that don't have access easily to any passenger service yet. Another recommendation would be to take and look at all of the crossings. The FRA has done a predictive model on what we would expect to see in terms of how many incidents, how many collisions at a crossing. We should be looking at when our numbers don't match what's predicted, figure out why, and fund projects to address when we have crossings that are more problematic than they should be given their exposure. Exposure relates to how many vehicles come through the intersection, how many trains come through the through the crossing. One of the most exciting things I've watched and been an adjacent to is when Wisconsin developed their highway rail grade crossing safety action plan. This was a mandatory action that every state needed to take. But as part of it, they were able to identify actions, how they plan to improve safety. So now that the actions have been identified, the next step is funding them. And then lastly, personally, I believe that there needs to be an expanded engagement in the education and enforcement of crossing safety. I cringe every time I see a senior picture or a wedding picture that is taken on a railroad. The pictures, I have countless pictures of people stopping on tracks. I think there's a false sense of security and safety, and we need to do a better job of educating our drivers, our bicyclists, and our pedestrians on the risks that they may not even know exist at the crossings. Not part of the report card, but as my personal, every time I present, I make sure I let people know this. And if you watch the news at all, you may have seen a recent video of a truck that was stuck on a humped crossing in Texas. It was a lowboy truck and it got stuck on one of the track. And somebody in the nearby area turned on their camera to start taping, right? Because they were stuck, they couldn't go anywhere. Like, oh, let's see what's going on. When a train came through and hit the truck, and the two people on the train unfortunately died from this incident. And the first thing that stood out to me is that nobody knew to call. They may have called 911, but did they know to call the railroad? So my public service announcement is that at every crossing, no matter what state you live in, there's an ENS sign. It is this white text on blue background sign, and it'll tell you two important details. The first is the phone number to call if you see something, like if you see debris sitting on the track that potentially could derail a train, if you see a car stalled, if your car is stalled, you've been involved in an accident and there are vehicles or people close to a crossing, be sure to call this number. And when you do, the DOT number is what they're going to need to know where you are, so that they can tell anybody who's in the area or will be any trains that'll be moving through the crossing that there is an incident to be aware of and avoid. I encourage you, having written a chapter that went well beyond my own understanding of rail, a lot of work goes into writing these reports. And the more we can get people to read it, the more educated you can become, the more you might accidentally educate somebody else who might know somebody who can help be the cause of change. So please do visit our website where the report card is saved, and you can read any of the chapters. You don't have to just read rail. And Jake, who I believe is on the call today, he's the one who asked me to write the rail chapter, and I thank him for this opportunity. I have never met an advocate quite as well-spoken as him. And he makes it seem not scary to talk about this type of stuff. So if you have an interest in being one of our advocates, I encourage you to reach out to Jake or others that you have met either with ASCE or other professional organizations to help bring information and knowledge to the people that are making decisions about funding.
Thank you, Joanna. Such good information. Next up, we're going to keep going, is Scott Rogers. Welcome, Scott.
Well, thank you, Carol. And I'm also going to share my screen, and we'll make sure that that actually works for everyone. So you should be seeing some logos on there. My name is Scott Rogers. I am Vice President, Governmental Affairs at the Eau Claire Area Chamber of Commerce. And I wear a few different hats, but I'm coming to you from my office in Eau Claire, and I'm going to talk about passenger rail today. I'm also a commissioner on the Midwest Interstate Passenger Rail Commission. That's a gubernatorial appointment. It's a interstate compact between 8 upper Midwest states that work on coordination and expansion of passenger rail service. I'm also one of the commissioners on the Chippewa-St. Croix Rail Commission here in West Central Wisconsin, which I'll talk about in a minute. And then I happen to be the chair of a nonprofit advocacy group called the West Central Wisconsin Rail Coalition. So I have a few hats. I'm also a layman. I'm not a transportation professional like many of you on this call or other speakers. And I'm also not a representative of Wisconsin DOT, but I borrowed some of their slides for talking about passenger service. And if I do get anything wrong, Lisa Stern is next. That's her area, and she can correct anything that maybe I misspeak about. So Jenna had shown this slide of our current passenger rail service in Wisconsin. We have pretty good service between Milwaukee and Chicago, 7 trains a day. We have the long distance Empire Builder through the Dells, La Crosse, and onto the West Coast, the new Borealis, as she mentioned. And then the Hiawatha service, 2 of those trains have direct dedicated bus service connections that go up through the Fox Valley to Green Bay to give them access. So if we're going to talk about the perspective of a passenger or somebody interested in the economy and how passenger rail service grades in Wisconsin, it's going to depend a little bit where you live. So if you live in Milwaukee, you probably have pretty good access to service. I live in Eau Claire, and I have to drive to La Crosse, Red Wing, or Toma to get on a train. So that's less desirable, and I wouldn't rate our service here very high. Some of the good news is that we have seen the first expansion in passenger rail service in Wisconsin in 22 years. Last year in May, when the Borealis started running as a state-supported train, extending Hiawatha service up through Wisconsin Dells, La Crosse, and on into Minnesota and St. Paul. And you can see the ribbon cutting going on here at La Crosse. And I like to point out that was my colleagues at the La Crosse Chamber that supplied the ribbon, scissors. And those of us in places like Eau Claire and Menominee hope that our scissors will get used for expanding a passenger train in the future. The Borealis is off to a great start. It's exceeding estimates for passengers, and so that's a good sign that there's pent-up demand in Wisconsin for passenger rail service. And this is another map, which you can see has more lines on it, and this is the one from the Wisconsin Rail Plan 2050. So it envisions more service to more communities in Wisconsin. So places like Eau Claire, Madison, actual train service up to Green Bay, and expanded service to other cities. And what is making this map perhaps possible in the future is the bipartisan infrastructure law. And Jenna talked a little bit about dedicated funding. One of the things that has changed with that law is this is an FRA chart showing annual passenger rail appropriations and authorizations. And each year of the 5 years of the BIL has as much funding as the previous 10 years. And it also created a pipeline called the Corridor Identification and Development Program that actually is a path to starting with a potential corridor and moving it all the way through design and construction and into operation. And when the BIL was passed and then the Federal Railroad Administration started implementing the funding under it, it did create the Corridor Idea and Development Program, and invited departments of transportation and other qualified entities to apply to be part of that program. And this is a chart from Wisconsin DOT showing actually 7 corridors that affect Wisconsin that are part of that program that were accepted into it. So we have 4 that Wisconsin DOT is the lead on. The Chicago to Milwaukee, increasing the frequency there. Another perhaps round trip between Chicago and the Twin Cities through La Crosse, and then new services to serve Madison, Eau Claire, and then up the Fox Valley to Milwaukee. There's also a corridor ID study underway between Eau Claire and the Twin Cities that was sponsored by our commission in this region. Minnesota DOT sponsored a study to get service from the Twin Cities through Superior, Wisconsin to Duluth. And there's one more, the Big Sky Rail Authority in Montana sponsoring a study of a new long distance train between Chicago and the West Coast that would go through southern North Dakota and southern Montana. There are some significant improvements underway in Wisconsin that would help our passenger rail service. One of them is track work and other improvements that are facilitating the Borealis that has already started. And then increasing the frequencies on the Hiawatha service between Chicago and Milwaukee. There's an expansion of the platforms at Milwaukee Airport Station, a freight bypass around a yard in Milwaukee, and then upgrades to signaling. And all those are things that will allow Wisconsin DOT, which sponsors that service, to increase service to 8 trains a day and eventually 10. DOT is also receiving some equipment so that all of the Hiawatha trains will be running with new equipment within a few years. I did want to mention the Chippewa-St. Croix Rail Commission, and Jenna also talked about what kind of innovation is going on in various things, and that's an innovation that we've been talking about for passenger rail as well. So the Chippewa-St. Croix Rail Commission was created by 3 counties and 6 municipalities in west central Wisconsin to look at a regional corridor between Eau Claire and the Twin Cities, where we have a tremendous amount of commerce taking place. And since the commission was formed, it has also included the DOTs of both states, the Regional Planning Commission, the Union Pacific Railroad, over whose tracks it would operate, Ramsey and Washington counties in Minnesota. Ramsey County actually owns St. Paul Union Depot. And then in the institutions of higher learning in our region, the UW schools and the technical colleges have been interested in how that would provide value to our region and to their students and faculty and the economy. And so they've been active in that commission as well. And the commission is really advancing some innovative ideas as part of the Corridor ID program. One would be a competitive operator selection. There is a trade association of rail operators who operate commuter services and other services, not only in the US or around the world. They are interested in bidding on operating the service. We've been working with Union Pacific, who has suggested a different model for access to their tracks, which would be a market rate for using them in return for perhaps lower capital. That line in particular has class 4 track. You heard Jenna talking about classes of track, which is a very good class of track. It has the PTC that you need to have for passenger services. And so there's some innovations that can happen there, and then transportation-oriented development. Again, these are the corridors that are being studied, and the study currently is the first round. So that's the scoping, no match required, and then you'd move into the service development plan, which is the second stage. The good news is the service development plan is 90% federal funded, like a lot of other transportation programs. The challenge is that it will require a 10% match, and where can that come from, whether it'll come from the state or other sources. We do know the governor's budget came out this week, and the governor has made some recommendations to increase support for passenger rail operations and feasibility studies. So we'll learn more about that as we go forward. But it's a service development plan that actually gets into the detail to find out if a service is feasible, covering all of these things in terms of return on investment, what it's going to take for capital for improvements, what kind of service that you would have. And the reasons for doing this from a perspective of someone at the Chamber of Commerce is that it can create a lot of economic activity around passenger rail service. This is normal Bloomington, Illinois, where they've seen tremendous economic development on the Chicago to St. Louis corridor, a mid-sized city with a state university. The Borealis, which started, was estimated to return $25 million in annual economic benefits each year. And Missouri did a study of their St. Louis to Kansas City services, where their few million a year that they invest in it returns 22 million in annual tax revenue and over 208 million in total economic activity for the state of Missouri. Many of us in Wisconsin and chambers of commerce, tourist agencies, businesses put together a statement that you can see here that talk about why we should look at increasing passenger rail service and serving more cities. And we would invite folks who might be interested in that to find us and sign on to that statement as well. So there's my contact information. I have limited time and moved right through it today, and appreciate the opportunity to have joined you today.
Scott, thank you so much for the information. And we are now going to move to Lisa Stern. Take it away, Lisa.
All right. Okay, so today I'm going to focus on the freight and safety side of the programs we have here and in Wisconsin. I'm Lisa Stern. I'm the Chief of Railroads and Harbors here at the Wisconsin Department of Transportation. In our section, we work on the passenger rail. So I've been working with Scott on these various projects as well. And we have our freight rail program as well as the safety side. So I also have worked with Joanna quite a bit on trying to make our crossing safer here in the state. So it's great to see both of you here today. So just to reiterate a little bit of what Joanna said, here is the overall rail system here in the state of Wisconsin. We do update our map annually, and you can Google it online, just Wisconsin Rail Map, and you'll get the latest one. So we just updated recently to the 2025 map. And we do have a little over 3,300 miles of the railroad in Wisconsin, and about a little over 600 of those are state-owned. Most of that is in the southern part of the state. And a lot of those were purchased through the FRAP program that I'll talk about a little bit more here. Additionally, I just want to point out that we do also have a lot of port access to the rails, both Superior, Green Bay, Milwaukee, Manitowoc. There is the rail connection to both harbors and also our trucking industry is an extremely important part of our system. Here gets to that a little bit better. We do have some intermodal sites. This is one of the focuses of our department right now, is trying to improve some intermodal facilities. We do have 2 private intermodal sites on the west side of the state. I believe New Richmond right now is only doing cars. It's not a true intermodal at this point. But we are looking to try to bring an intermodal facility to the southeast region of the state to help our shippers here in the state. I think one of the things, the important parts of rail on the freight side for an economy is providing an effective, cost-effective, and reliable way to transport for our shippers. We have a lot of manufacturing and agricultural products here in the state, as well as some like sand and other types of commodities that can travel and be an important part of our economy. This just breaks down, it's kind of a nice visual of the breakdown of the different, how our freight is moved in the state. About 30% is currently moved by rail, both by value and tonnage. So to help continue to preserve and keep a good rail system in the state, back in 1977, the state developed the Freight Rail Preservation Program, call it FRAP for short. And what that is, the main point is to preserve rail in Wisconsin. So originally, a lot of that state-owned rail corridors were purchased through this program. And as Joanna said, originally the state constitution, the state could not directly contract with railroads. So it was all done through counties and rail commissions. But then in 1992, we were allowed to give the grants directly to the railroads. And just recently, this last year, we've opened up the grant program a little more. It was quite restrictive to mostly publicly owned rail lines. And it's been opened up to be open to all types of railroads in the state, whether they're privately or publicly owned. They will be ranked basically really based on the preserving rail corridors for shippers. Here's a line. You can see this is a recently rehabilitated line here in Wisconsin. The tracks and the ties look very, very nice. The other program we have is a loan program. So this is the Freight Rail Infrastructure Improvement Program, as we call it, FRIP. And this is all funded out of, there was some seed money back probably in 1992, and since then it's really been paying for itself. So we will give loans out to shippers and railroads too. Railroads have also used this to help offset the 20% of their cost share for the FRAP program. Up to 10% can be a FRIP loan. But we'll build either rail facilities or the storage facilities. We often provide loans for the grain bins and other storage facilities for commodities that are shipped by rail. This is quite a well-used program, and it can be up to $3 million in a loan for a facility. And I should have said too, for the FRAP program, typically every year we have between 5 and probably 15 million. It depends on the budget and what's been made available, but we have about $5 to $15 million available annually. One of the projects that we did, and one of the bottlenecks that was mentioned in the report, is the Merrimack Bridge. The Merrimack Bridge it spans the Lake Wisconsin on the Wisconsin River, and it is the only way in for rail that serves rail for Sauk County. And it was built back in, I think the structure started in the 1870s. The main steel was mostly done in before 1910. And as you can see here in the historical picture on the left, this was built before they dammed up and made the lake. And you can see on the right here, the water is quite a bit higher now, and it was degraded down to 263, so you couldn't. Right, most trains we say 286, so that's how much they can load up each car, and so they had to short load all the cars, and so that cost the shippers in Sauk County significantly more money to be able to ship by rail, and it also just reduces the efficiency for them. So this project is about to wrap up. It's almost done with construction. When it's done, they'll be able to do the full load of 286 in the cars, and they'll be able to run at 25 miles per hour. This project was funded both with the FRAP program, and we also combined it with infra grant. So we applied for federal grant program to help with this. Additionally, we got funds from Sauk County. Wisconsin Southern Railroad also provided funds, and the Wisconsin River Transit Commission, as well as the Eastern Wisconsin County Rail Commission, and I believe Pecatonica Rail Commission. So the various counties that are part of how we operate the state-owned system all participated, because this is a key project for our state. One of the other, before I move on, actually, I didn't make a slide for it, but we are also working on the Janesville bridges, which are in a similar situation. Those are a series of 5 bridges in Janesville that are currently owned by Union Pacific. It is the key route for all of WSOR's system to go into Chicago, and that has that combined funding from all the different counties. This one also is a lot of counties and local funds, as well as WSOR. That's a project that we're currently working to get under obligation with also a federal grant and a FRAP grant. Moving on to the highway crossing side, as Joanna said, these statistics are a little bit different than what she had, but they're constantly changing and being upgraded and improved. And this one is probably a little bit older. This is from the 2022 report. But it's about the same. We have just under 7,000 total crossings, and about 70%, like she said, are public crossings. And this breaks down to whether they're grade separated or at grade. whether they have warning devices or not. So it kind of gives you an overview of our status of crossings. One of the things we look at is here's a kind of what I'd call a heat map of incidents across the state on where we had, this was from 2016 to 2020 or 21, shows you where we are having the most incidents for rail crossing crashes or crashes. The other thing I think is just kind of interesting is, you know, you look at most of them do happen during the day. We follow pretty close to the national average about when our crashes are happening. So one of the things we do to help work is we have regular projects trying to upgrade our crossings, both grade separated and at grade, to improve safety and efficiency. We do about 20 to 25 projects in that OCR program Joanna mentioned. We have a separate program on the Wisconsin DOT side that does 5 to 7. And then we have the crossing repair program. That is specifically for state trunk highways and for the crossing surfaces itself. In Wisconsin, the state trunk highways, the state has to pay for 85% of the crossing surface repairs. On local roads, the railroads are 100% responsible to keep those in good condition. If you do have issues with your crossing at the local road level, you can contact us, or also the Office of Commissioner of Railroads. If you file a petition, they can work with the railroad to get them out there. And then we have, it varies every year, but on average about 14 highway improvement projects where we're working on the highway. And as we go through it, we also look at improve the crossing safety as part of the highway project. So the specific warning crossing safety devices we have, the OCR program, WISDOT manages that for OCR, but the Office of Commissioner of Railroads, or OCR, does select the crossings that need to be upgraded. That program is specifically limited to active warning devices. So as you can see here, here's a new gate arm and lights that were put in Pewaukee, Wisconsin. The elimination of hazards is the Wisconsin DOT side. It is much smaller. It's only about under $600,000 we get annually for that. That one has a little more flexibility where we can do maybe medians or some roadway improvements. It's called elimination of hazards. So that allows for some geometric improvements that are not allowed under the warning device program. That's the larger program. Each crossing.
It's almost time to wrap up.
Okay. Yep. So, all right. And then just the other funding sources that we have, we also, Joanna had mentioned the interconnected crossings. We do have a separate program that allows for upgrading those and making sure that those work as well. And then we have the state planning and research funding options where we're looking at like pedestrian and bicyclists and where can we improve safety and try to do those studies to find what we could do. And then if you have any questions, you can always outreach. Here's my contact information. So that's the end of my
Lisa, thank you very much. Such important information. Our last invited speaker is Susan Gaeddert, 1,000 Friends of Wisconsin. Take it away.
Hi, thank you. Yes, I am Susan Gaeddert. I am the Community Programs Director at 1,000 Friends of Wisconsin. I am working on getting my screen shared here. My presentation up. So I'm going to provide you all with a little bit different kind of take on this. So 1,000 Friends, if you're not familiar with our organization, we're a nonprofit that works statewide. We were founded nearly 30 years ago in 1996. And our mission statement is there in italics at the bottom of the screen. It's a lot of words, so I'm not going to read it to you. But essentially, we specialize in land use planning and transportation policy. And we really look at the intersection of that with climate, health, and equity to promote healthy communities. And we do that by working at the community level and advocating for state policy that supports all of that. We do a lot of different things, but I'm going to highlight a few of our programs and coalitions here that are relevant to the topic today. And I will say that it's been a while since we've been intricately involved in any kind of rail project or advocacy, but it's all related to the work we do. So I run a program called Active Wisconsin, which has been around for a little while. It's a statewide network of, or a coalition rather, of local leaders and advocates who want to support active transportation. And by that, I'm talking about walking, biking, and transit access in their cities and towns. So the way we do that is offer resources and technical assistance. And we also often host webinars and events to help promote that work statewide. 2 years ago, we launched a program called the Community Transportation Academy. That's in a way a natural outgrowth of Active Wisconsin. So this is very community specific. It's a free course for members of the public who want to learn more about local transportation planning and processes and how all of that works. Because I'm sure, as you can tell from just the presentations on rail alone today, transportation is very complex. There are a lot of different funding sources, a lot of different jurisdictions and levels of government involved. And yet it is public space. This is about, information that everybody has the right to have access to, and talk about public space that we all access or should be able to access. So I started this program as a way to reach people in specific communities and help equip them with knowledge and skills to be a part of solutions in their own communities. To make transportation safer and more accessible for everyone, in particular non-drivers. And we know from WisDOT's own data that about 30% of the state's population does not drive. So it's been held so far. We've held 4 of them, and I'm gearing up for 2 more this year. But as you can see from this map, some of the locations where we have held the academy, namely La Crosse, Kenosha, and where West Dallas is almost in Milwaukee, so we'll count it. These are places that are right now accessible by rail. And the other locations, we've also been to Stevens Point, Beloit, we're headed to Green Bay. These are locations that are not easily accessible by passenger rail. But it comes up in every single academy, even if that's not our focus. It has definitely come up for people. So I have a couple of examples of that. In the Beloit Academy, which was running a year ago, early on, one of our presentations, one of the guests I invited were from the State Line Area Transportation Study. That's the MPO for the Beloit area, and it dips down into Illinois as well. And they talked generally about the transportation planning they do and what their responsibilities are as a regional transportation group. And they shared a little bit about what they do regarding rail. So this is, I just sort of slurped this slide from their presentation. It's on long range multimodal plans and studies. And they explained how they actually did the study for passenger rail service should it come to the Beloit area. So they looked at demographics, household density, where the employment centers are, and just sort of how all of that would factor in to eventual passenger rail plans. And there was definitely a lot of enthusiasm in this group for the potential for passenger rail in that part of the state, especially with that connection between Chicago and Madison. Really felt like it was missing. Last fall, we ran this academy in Kenosha. So, and of course, there's the potential for KRM that's perhaps being resurrected. It was something that started and stopped, and now it's being looked at again. So I arranged for a guest speaker to talk, to spend an entire session just on KRM and what that could look like. So he talked through sort of the history, the planning process, the different things they have to consider, the different jurisdictions they're running through, how those connections could be made. And what I'll say about this is that there was, again, a lot of interest in this group. I had several people in the cohort of participants in Kenosha who do not drive or who care for family members with disabilities who have places to go but cannot drive a car. And we're very interested in the possibility of ways of getting outside of Kenosha without having to be in a car. Changing gears just a little bit, I'll just say briefly about coalition work we do in Milwaukee around the Rethink I-794 project. This is led by my counterpart in Milwaukee, our policy director, Carl Glazemeyer. So if you have specific questions, let me know and I can direct you to them. But the goal of this coalition is to remove the 794 highway and replace it with an at-grade boulevard in downtown Milwaukee. For several reasons. One, because it is some of the most valuable real estate in Wisconsin. I think the estimated value of just the footprint is $1.5 billion. That's with a B. So there is so much potential if that highway was replaced with a street grid for a lot of economic development, housing density, reconnecting the commercial corridor of Milwaukee with the historic Third Ward, really opening up more access to the lakefront, et cetera. And the reason I bring it up is because part of that potentially could involve moving the current Amtrak station, the multimodal station, to be in a more accessible location. And I'll be upfront and say that as a coalition, there is not an official position on that specific aspect of this whole rethinking 794, because there's a lot of moving parts. It's very complex. And I think right now the focus is just looking at pedestrian access generally and the potential for economic development and activity. But it is definitely part of the conversation. And yeah, rail access in Milwaukee is a big topic for a lot of people. And I've been seeing that in the chat as well. On the slides, I have a couple links to things that would provide more information about that if anybody is interested. So just kind of wrapping up here, the common threads through all of this work, while we are really looking at ways of connecting people in communities. So through Active Wisconsin, through the Community Transportation Academy, and through a lot of the work we're doing in the Milwaukee area, specifically with Carl, it really is about like how people can connect with each other and get where they need to go every day. But at the same time, a lot of times what comes up is how people get from one community to another. I think that's where this passenger rail is such a big piece of the conversation. We see billions of dollars spent building roads, building highways, maintaining them, sometimes expanding them. And we know that if we could shift some of that money into public transit, pedestrian safety, and passenger rail, that would really open up the options for people, whether or not they can drive, kind of depending on what their situation is. So that's really what's important to us as an organization is that foundation of healthy communities for everyone. And a lot of what we do is raising public awareness and trying to get support for all of those things to make it possible for everyone in Wisconsin. I think that's all I've got. So here's my contact information. Please feel free to reach out if you have questions or want to know more. And the last thing I'll say is the best way to hear about what we're doing and what we're involved in is to sign up for our e-news on our website. I would go to activewisconsin.org or 1kfriends.org for more information on that.
Susan, thank you very much for this presentation. I want to say that I live a block from Burns Commons, one end of the HOP line, and love it, and need to have that expanded a lot more in Milwaukee. And now, Anastasia, you are, I know that Maddie Connell is here, and you are going to start her video. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. Give me 1 second to get that screen sharing started. I want to say that our next speakers are the student speakers who are the 2024 ASCE Wisconsin Student Award winners, and we're going to hear from them about the future of engineering in Wisconsin.
Hello everyone, my name is Madeline Connell and I'm a co-winner of ASCE's 2024 Outstanding Senior Civil Engineering Student Award. I'm a May 2024 graduate of Marquette University's Opus College of Engineering, in which I obtained a civil engineering degree. But something to note about me is I chose civil engineering on a bit of a whim. About 2 months before I started college, I switched into the program, and I'm so glad I did. Although I had my ups and downs, there were classes that made me question if I liked civil engineering, if it's what I wanted to be doing. But then there were also classes that I loved, such as urban planning and structural analysis and concrete design, which reinforced the idea back to me that I was going to be okay, I knew what I was doing, and I was going to like what I was doing. So I'm so grateful for those experiences. And during my time at Marquette, I was also able to become involved in some clubs, 2 of which were the Society of Women Engineers, SWI, and ASCE. ASCE led me to some great leadership experiences through becoming our secretary my senior year and also becoming the co-captain of our concrete canoe my senior year. I was in charge of the mixed design and aesthetics, and then my partner was in charge of the hull design. Through this leadership experience, I was able to learn more about my leadership skills, and then I was also able to fully learn about the process from start to end, about how to build a concrete canoe, and able to really put what I was learning in the classroom into something. And this experience ended with me and my friend getting to race our canoe at Symposium in freezing cold weather, but it was still really great to have that ending of that chapter. And ASCE is what led me to my current company, and that's how I learned about it. And I've now been here for about 7 months. I started in July, and I've been really happy. I've met so many fellow concrete canoe captains. I've probably met 7 or 8 just about out of our Chicago office yet. So that's been a really great bonding experience with people. But my job, initially, I'm a project engineer, one, and I was expecting to get thrown out into the field on a job site somewhere. But I've been in the office for 7 months, so that was a bit of a learning experience. And me understanding that leadership and management did have a path for me and that they knew what was best for me. And turns out they were right. I've gotten really valuable experiences that I wouldn't have gotten if I was in the field right away. I understand the processes and systems that we use, I think, so much better than I would have. And I've been able to create really great relationships with the people in the office, which will be great for me when I need help. And yeah, it's been a really great experience. So I would like to say thank you to ASCE and the League of Wisconsin Women's Voters for having me today. Thank you so much. Bye.
And next is Austin Cooper.
Thank you, Carol. I'll just share my screen. I've got a presentation instead of just talking. So hi, everybody. My name is Austin Cooper. I'm a recent graduate of the University of Wisconsin-Platteville, where I majored in civil engineering with a structural engineering emphasis. Just like Maddie, I'm also a co-winner of the Outstanding Senior Civil Engineering Student Award. I'll tell you a little bit more about the award since Maddie didn't. It recognizes senior civil engineering students for their academic achievement, excellence in engineering, and service to the profession. During college, I was very heavily involved in our ASCE student chapter, among other things. I was a concrete canoe co-captain for 3 years. I was on the steel bridge team. I helped with fundraising. I led various committees. But my most influential role during my college career was as the executive chair of the 2023 ASCE Championships, which we hosted in Platteville. I spent 18 months of my student career planning and organizing this event with ASCE leadership, university officials, and other students that were involved. We brought 48 universities to Platteville from all around the country and even a couple international schools, and they came to compete in concrete canoe, surveying, and sustainable solutions competitions. We also provided them an opportunity to network with the other students there, as well as professionals and local companies looking to hire. This picture that I've shown here is us lining up the buoys for the concrete canoe sprint races out at the lake. So overall, a very busy college career for me. I'd like to talk a little bit about why I chose civil engineering. So from early on, I always enjoyed building things. Like a lot of other kids, this was mainly Lego sets. And then as I grew older, it turned into helping with different renovation projects around the house. In school, I was good at math and I found I liked solving problems, which led me towards engineering a little bit. I discovered there was something called Project Lead the Way courses, which were kind of higher level engineering specific courses, essentially college level education that was being shrunk into a high school class and taught to us. So it was a nice way to get exposed to that kind of stuff before college, which without those courses, I would have otherwise not been able to do. I always had a great interest in environmental concerns and overall sustainability of the world. So environmental engineering kind of seemed like it was something I wanted to do. However, as I went through college, I grew more of an interest in the mode of connecting people and the world's economy that way. I started as transportation engineering and quickly switched over to structures because I found I liked bridges where you can connect different communities together that would otherwise be separate. It's super easy for me to stay interested in civil engineering in my short career so far, and I don't think it'll be a problem moving forward because there's so much project diversity. Every project is different in the fact that it has different considerations, concerns, goals to take into account. There's different stakeholders involved, and you want to make sure everybody is okay with what you're doing, essentially. This is a project that shows this is a picture that shows a project I worked on in Iowa as an intern before my senior year. A lot of stakeholders on this project, just looking at it right away, we have a house very close. So making sure that the landowners nearby aren't too affected and you're connecting people in the right way it was really intriguing to me. So my career now, I'm a graduate engineer at MSA Professional Services in our Madison, Wisconsin office. I'm currently on the bridge team where I am spending most of my time in design during the winter, and then I do some construction observation when it gets warmer out. I also do some bridge inspection in various times of the year. My goals for my career are to become a professional engineer, which I'm happy to report I found out yesterday I passed the exam. So I've got to get my 4 years of experience, but the hard part is over. I'd like to move into more of a project management role, become closer with stakeholders and work with clients better that way. I'd like to become a bridge inspection team leader. I've also taken that course and test. I'm just waiting to hear on the results. And I'd like to have continued involvement with ASCE as I did during college. So that's a little bit about me. Thank you for having me.
Congratulations, Austin, and bravo to
Thank you.
Maddie and Austin for being with us today. I taught engineering students for 32 years at Milwaukee School of Engineering, and I can tell you that these two wonderful students are a sample of the kinds of students I taught and a wonderful way to have a career. Our next speaker is Dan. I'm going to say Dan, but it's Dr. Daniel Zitomer, Marquette, who's going to give a tribute to Dr. Michael Lovell, who is a president, I'm not sure I have the right terms, at Marquette and at UW-Milwaukee. Take it away, Dan.
Thank you, Carol. I was happy to be asked to give this tribute for a friend of mine and also an outstanding engineering leader in Wisconsin and in the United States. And many of you probably knew Mike Lovell. Some of you didn't, but Michael Lovell, this is Mike, and he was president of Marquette University and passed away unexpectedly on last June 9th. Mike had been fighting cancer for about 3 years, but had really persevered through that and was remained president. And it really was a shock to the community when he passed away unexpectedly while on pilgrimage in in Rome at the Vatican this summer. And so he's an outstanding engineering leader and certainly a great supporter of civil engineering. And I just like to tell you a little bit about Mike. And so Mike, he's a mechanical engineer, a great instructor and teacher, and also an engineering leader and academic leader. And his last role was serving as president of Marquette University for 10 years. And that was very special. One, because before that, since 1888, Marquette had always had a Jesuit priest as the president. And right before Mike came 10 years ago, they changed the rules at the university. And Mike was the first non-clergyman president of the university. And of course, we're all very happy in the College of Engineering because Mike was a well-known engineer. Even more interesting about Mike was that he received all of his degrees in mechanical engineering, BS, MS, and PhD from University of Pittsburgh. And he actually came to Wisconsin and to Milwaukee to be Dean of Engineering at UWM, which he did really well for a number of years. So well, in fact, that when the chancellor, who's the president of UWM, basically resigned, Mike became the chancellor of UWM. So he was running University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. And we all felt very fortunate and happy when 10 years ago he then came to be president of Marquette. So he has a long-standing service to the state and to the Milwaukee area. I could talk a lot about his professional, achievements. He had more than 100 journal articles, wrote a dozen book chapters, co-authored books on tribology for scientists and engineers, a very well-known textbook, and just excellent grant writing, but and funding level and education of grad students and undergrads. But what really set Mike apart was he is really taught my friends in arts and sciences and theology and philosophy at Marquette the true service that and dedication to helping others that can come from an engineer. He and his wife Amy were very committed to community service and had a lot of initiatives in terms of mental and spiritual health in the Milwaukee community, especially on serving those that need help the most, those in need. And he really, he was in terms of civil engineering, we can say that he was a great leader in terms of he was a member of the Water Council. He was a member of the Water Council Board of Directors and really helped my group in civil engineering in water and wastewater and trying to gain connections with industry. So really overall, a man of great faith, a man that taught people that engineers actually do have parts and can do have other essential skills other than math and science, and that we can be great leaders, that we can be careful and kind for others. And it was really my great fortune to have known Mike for 20 years and worked with him. And it's a great loss.
Thank you so much for that tribute. I wanted to mention my one contact with him came when the president at ASCE-WI asked if I would go with Mike on a visit. I think it was American Transmission Company, which I did. And I didn't say a word. At the end, we said goodbye. And on the way to the car, he said, "Thank you for coming. I have learned that when I'm asking for money, it always helps to have someone along." And that really sums up why the League of Women Voters is working with the American Society of Civil Engineers to improve our many categories of infrastructure so that they are fully functioning and well-maintained. And that is what we are advocating for in this project. And Anastasia, Q&A, take it away.
All right, perfect. I am going to get all of our speakers pinned here together so we can see them during Q&A. I'll start out though with a question that's probably more directed towards Joanna and Lisa. So we've heard a lot in this program about the way that rail intersects with multiple other areas of infrastructure. And there's also the area of maintenance of facilities that affects railways. How does the prioritization of like where attention and funding goes works, given that rail has so many things that it intersects with?
Well, I can try to answer that. So, it depends on the program you're talking about. So when we're talking about the crossings between highways and railroads, one is if the highway is having a project, it doesn't really, we look at whatever crossings part of that highway. So the highway was chosen for, the various reasons of the condition of the highway or maybe expansion or however it was chosen through that highway process. If it impacts a railroad crossing, whether it's a grade separated or at grade, we look at it regardless of whatever rank it might have. Otherwise, for our safety programs, we do have a statewide safety analysis. We are working to have it work better with the FRA. Recently, FRA updated their rankings and the evaluation that Joanna talked about. So we're working on improving our system and making it work with that much better process they've got. So then we look at that, and that's ranked, based on potential crashes, the ADTs on the roadway, any safety issues we may see. And then also sometimes just a local community will bring something to the attention of either the Department of Transportation or the Office of Commissioner of Railroads, and then it kind of gets evaluated. So that's for the crossings. As far as freight rail project improvements for the FRAP grants, those are initiated by the grant applicant. So it's a railroad typically. Sometimes a local community initiates, they put in an application. We can rank those applications by really what we're looking to do is preserve rail. So we will evaluate each of the applications and which one is, if we put the money here, it will serve the most shippers. It's the most likely in need of public funds. It's not going to be the class 1 main line, right? Because that can sustain itself. But we're looking at where would that public investment really kind of make the difference. And Merrimack Bridge, the project I highlighted, is a perfect example. That's a $20 million project that it's serving Baraboo, North Freedom, Reedsburg. Those communities themselves could not support the shippers in those communities could not do that all on their own. But with the public investment, it's making all the difference for those communities and in helping expand the economic impact for the shippers and the communities there. So hopefully that answers the question.
Absolutely, thank you. Okay. Our lovely audience always has so many amazing questions in here. I'm going to try to catch as much of these as possible. Someone had asked, they know that there are crash reduction factors that exist for highways. Do crash reduction factors exist for rail facilities as well?
Yeah, and I thank Mike May for jumping in with an answer there, but it is an interesting, from my perspective, what I find interesting is when you have FRA and FHWA, and they're both looking at the same crossing from two different perspectives. The thing that hasn't really fully come together is what we are accustomed to in the traffic engineering world in terms of those crash reduction factors. Do I think it's possible that there's a lot of agencies that have developed their own way of looking at it or knowing the effectiveness of certain treatments? Yes, there just isn't a countermeasure database to go to that shows a number of studies, unfortunately. Lisa, anything to add?
No, I would agree with that. I think that, you know, each state is kind of looking at it its own way. FHWA has its own factors, FRA. There isn't an overall view. I do think there is an effort kind of starting to happen in that direction. But it's got a ways to go. And I know, I think Mike, if I remember the comments, was talking about, you know, quiet zones. That's a very specific type, but that is probably the closest to what is out there. But that's for, you know, for basically a community who wants the horns to stop blowing. There's a process and evaluation that goes on there, but it hasn't been expanded to anything beyond that specific program. But I agree, what you said, Joanna, you got it.
Perfect, thank you. This question's probably more directed towards Scott and Susan, but of course anyone can jump in, including our two student speakers. You are new authorities in the area of infrastructure, but you are authorities nonetheless. What could we as the public do to help rail in Wisconsin become more of a standard mode of public travel and transit?
I can take a quick stab at it. Maybe somebody else wants to say something, but there's going to need to be some decisions made to move forward with the corridor ID studies. There's a 10% match that has to happen to keep them moving. That would be the near-term thing. And it's just generally talking with public officials and encouraging them to make those kind of investments and to point out that they do return on those investments and they are good for the state.
Yeah, if I could just add to that, I would underline all of that and just say, if you're interested in this, it's helpful to know a little more about the system as a whole, right? And how everything intersects. So the more you can learn about that and get together with other people who also care about that to help like build that advocacy base. Because we know, like from my work, I know that there are people in Wisconsin who are extremely enthusiastic about passenger rail in particular and expanding that. But understanding how that fits into everything else, especially like where the money comes from, I think that's just capitalism. Money matters. So like understanding how all that works so you can help build the support in your own community. I think that's key.
If I can add on to Susan, so some specific groups you could check out would be the Wisconsin Association of Railroad Passengers, All Aboard Wisconsin, the High Speed Rail Alliance, and the Rail Passengers Association in Washington, D.C. All are very knowledgeable on that.
Great information, thank you. I'm going to do a couple more. One of them is very quick. Many of the rail bridges in Wisconsin are older timber bridges. How often are rail bridges inspected?
Yeah, so the railroads are responsible to inspect their rail bridges. I want to say FRA requires every other year. We don't really, that's, you know, kind of tough information to get a hold of. Railroads don't want to share it, but they are required to follow the FRA safety regulations and do those inspections. And yes, you're right. There are still a lot of timber bridges out there. On the state side, on the state system, I can tell you the FRAP program's been working very diligently and successfully to upgrade those and to replace them, sometimes with just a culvert when we can, otherwise with a steel or concrete bridge. So
I know I'm not a speaker, Lisa, but I'm going to
Yeah.
jump in there. Just
Yeah.
as a former railroader, the FRA does require annual inspections with no more than 540 days between inspections.
Yep, that's where I was like, it was a little over
Yep.
a year, but not quite two. Yep, thank you very much, Jake.
And in addition to that, for anyone who likes to sleep better at night, knowing that railroad tracks get very, very regular inspections, there's a visual inspection of mainline track twice a week for some of the higher speeds and more higher volume tracks. And then it goes down from there. So like as you get into less traveled and lower speed tracks, the inspections aren't as frequent just because they're not as critical. So, but I can tell you, when a track goes out of service, the railroads are very upset at their own people. And so those inspections happen very often. I've done them myself. So yeah.
And there are monthly inspections of active crossings to make sure the lights and gates are working. We do annual inspections of preemption now too, which is a huge improvement from 5 years ago.
Yep. Sorry, Carol. I know I wasn't a speaker in this session.
We love you, Jake.
Gonna
And
take me
he, one of our speakers from the other programs. So thank you. We are running short on time. I do want to get from all 6 of you here, what is the one last message you want us to take away from this program? What do you want us to go forth and advocate for to the public and our elected officials? And I'll start with Joanna.
I guess my message would be that railroad impacts everybody. I know it feels like a private industry when we're talking freight, and that people are making money off of it, and therefore it's not a good investment for taxpayers' dollars. But the impacts of this can be seen at the crossings. I mean, we're seeing it play out in Ohio, where they had the derailment. Rail impacts everybody, and it's worth funding for the safety and economic impacts to the entire state.
Thank you. Lisa?
Sure. Yeah, I guess I seen a couple comments. I think we all can work to help improve communication on these issues, and especially, I think the freight improvement and other things are important, but safety is critical. And I think we have to keep in mind that not only do we all have our own perspectives, but we all also have our limited resources. So, I think if you're reaching out to folks and you feel like you're not being heard, just keep reaching out and maybe try other people. We are all trying. I think there's a lot of people out there trying our best to get things done. There's just a lot of work to be done, and we can use all of you to help us get there. So.
Absolutely. Thank you. Scott?
Almost the answer I gave before to the question, but we're on the cusp of being able to have more passenger rail service in Wisconsin. And the message is that we talk about housing sometimes, and there's a term called the missing middle. And I think rail passenger service is sort of the missing middle of transportation between driving and flying. And it does help the mobility of our citizens, and it does have economic justification and a return on investment. So just getting that message across and to policymakers to help them understand it.
Definitely. Thank you. Susan?
Yeah, I would just say a point that I made really quickly in my presentation was that 30% of the Wisconsin population is non-driving. That includes people under 16 who are not old enough to get a license, but it includes a whole bunch of other people who can't drive for any number of reasons related to ability, affordability, mental illness, you name it. So expanding options like rail so that people can get not only to, everyday destinations within their own community, but from city to city in Wisconsin is going to just be good for everyone. And I think that knowing that can help build your advocacy base, and knowing that can help you understand who to reach out to and how to build support for passenger rail in the state.
Absolutely. Thank you. Austin?
I think I'd just kind of like to echo what Lisa said about communication and how it's really important, especially with the rail industry where a lot of things are privatized and maybe projects don't move along as quickly or things don't happen as quickly between private and public entities. Being a good communicator is important from the start, making sure that all the stakeholders know what needs to happen, and at least from the younger generation, finding ways that technology can be implemented to improve things. That could be as simple as using it somehow to keep people from stopping on the tracks. So just communication and finding ways to collaborate together will, I think, really help us moving forward.
A great lesson for all of us. And wrapping up with a live Madeline.
I would like to add on to Austin and Lisa's points of increasing the communication between states and how we can, I'm in Chicago now, so talking between Illinois and Wisconsin and just how we can increase and better our means of transportation between the two would be something I find interesting right now.
Fantastic answers all around. Thank you so much to you all for answering these questions and to our audience for asking them. Carol, we'll hand it over to you to wrap us up.
Dan, would you like one comment?
I
If
think
he's
maybe
not,
Dan has dropped off the call because we are running just a little bit long.
yeah. I am saying bravo to all of you today. Such good information, great to hear from students, and great to hear from Dan. And I want to thank our steering committee, our American Society of Civil Engineers, League of Women Voters Steering Committee. Every one of the speakers today did a wonderful job. The audience for great questions. And in the background, the families of all of our speakers who also made it possible. The employers, the technical support from the League of Women Voters, and a shout out to Anastasia Soluna. And the American Society of Civil Engineers, from the local chapter all the way to the national. And a shout out to Gordon Chafin at Washington, who, when I contacted him for a little bit of help, he said, yup, and did pitch in and make it possible for a couple of our webinars. And last but not least, my husband, Bob Diggleman, who has put up with a lot for a lot of months. So thank you much, and hope to see you in 2 weeks for our last webinar on parks and schools. Thank you.